Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of run-down no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to mybigfootsighting.com.
My name is Jonny. I live in West Georgia. I am married, been married for 16 years now. I have 3 children, and, basically I'm just a normal guy. I spent 6 years in the Marine Corps infantry, did about 3.5 years as a firefighter, and ended up moving, and now I work, we'll just say, the travel industry. But in 2011, we moved to the house that I'm living in right now. And it is in West Georgia, kind of in a semi-rural area. If you imagine Atlanta, and then you get the outskirts of Atlanta, and then you get the suburbs, then you've got semi-rural area, and then you've got the super rural area. The more west you go towards Alabama, it gets more rural. Well, I'm right there in that semi-rural area, right next to a very large wildlife management area, which I think that has a lot to do with the experiences I've had over the years. But about 2017-ish, 2018, I've only got 3 neighbors. I've got one neighbor that's about 150 yards in front of me, and then a neighbor that's about 75 yards to my left. Well, the neighbor in front of me, there's I think it's let's say 3 houses. The house in front of me, and then they've got 2 houses in front of them, and it's all one family. Well, how everything started, and I say around 2017, 2018, because I wasn't documenting any of this back then. I had absolutely no interest in it at all. In fact, I guess the only thing I really looked into back then was UFOs. I was kind of into that, and I watched Finding Bigfoot and stuff with the kids every once in a while. That was pretty much it. But my neighbors, they started having somebody basically harass them at night. And at first, we all thought it was children. They have, at the time, I think the boy was about 14, and then a 12-year-old girl that was in that family of the 3 houses. And this one particular house was like the target of all this activity. And basically all it was is beating on the side of the house, throwing rocks at the house, throwing sticks at the house, stuff like that. Well, it went on for, I don't know how long, maybe a couple of weeks or something. Probably longer than that, probably about a month, because it got to the point to where I started getting a little concerned. I started getting involved. I actually knew the father of that family really well, and my wife was friends with his wife. So eventually, after about a month, 3 weeks, whatever it was, of them having this activity over there, I started getting involved. So something would happen, and a lot of times they would call me, or I would hear the commotion going on over there. I'd see flashlights, whatever. And basically something would happen, and I would just run over there and ask them what's going on, and they'd tell me, oh, something hit the house, or somebody threw a rock, blah, blah, blah. And after so many months of this going on, I started to get concerned because, like I said, I'm not Rambo, but I spent a lot of time at night, basically hunting people. basically, and avoiding and hunting people. And it just didn't make any sense to me how these individuals, whoever they were, at first I thought it was children, how they were getting away with everything they were doing. And then the 14-year-old boy, he told me that him and his grandfather were walking down the driveway one night and he got hit in the chest with a rock. And he ran out in the woods and couldn't find anybody. Well, the only time anybody over there ever saw anyone was that 14-year-old boy. And his dad told me that, I don't remember exactly what happened, but something happened where he came outside and he heard like running off or whatever. So he goes over to the tree line and there's a trail that runs around the perimeter of their property and goes up towards this neighborhood that's up on the hill. And his father told me that the kid ran out there and probably about 60 yards away, there was a huge guy in all black standing in the middle of that trail looking at him. And that boy apparently cussed him out. And then this big, huge guy just stepped off into the woods. Well, that was the only time anybody ever saw anything. And when he told me that, all this stuff came just a little bit at a time. Started, picking up these odd things that were going on and realizing that, wait a second, this just isn't normal. And it definitely wasn't an animal, with the rock throwing and everything else. And I remember going over there one night. Well, actually one afternoon, the guy came and got me. He's like, hey man, let me show you something. And he takes me to his backyard. And at the edge of the yard, there's this big pine tree. And at the base of the pine tree, all the grass is worn down. Like somebody had been sitting there, like night after night or whatever. And it's lined up with his daughter's bedroom window. And, he was super concerned with all this activity going on. And then I think it was after that, one of the other family members that lives in one of the 3 houses works for the sheriff's department. So when these things would happen, they would start calling the sheriff's department. And they were coming out here like once every 2 weeks or so. And again, I would get involved. I'd go out there and I'd meet them and then I'd show them around. I'd walk them around the trails that are back there, trying to find how they're getting away. It was just so confusing. And then one night I went over there after something happened and there's a creek on the side of the house. So you go down the hill to the creek. Well, I'm looking around the creek and I'm walking back up the hill. And when I got to the top of the hill, the dogs started barking at me. And I happened to look down and there were 2 of these little like teepee structures. There's like little sticks, maybe 7-8 inches long. And there were 3 of them, like a little teepee. And they were, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 feet apart. And I noticed that if I'm standing up and I would walk up that hill and stop at the little teepee structures, the dogs wouldn't bark. But as soon as I went past those teepee structures, the dogs would bark. And I'm like, what in the world? Who is going through this amount of effort to do whatever it is that they're doing out here? And they weren't damaging anything. They were throwing rocks and sticks at the house. They threw the rock at the boy. But for the most part, it's not like they were stealing anything or destroying anything. So it was very, very confusing. I think where things really started to change for me is one of the nights where I'm at my house and I hear rifle fire. And I go and I grab my gun and I run over to their house and he's standing outside with a rifle, with an AR-15. And I'm like, dude, what's up? And he said, well, they're back, or they did it again. And I can't remember exactly what happened. They threw something at the house again or whatever. So he grabbed his AR, he came outside, he fired a few rounds into the dirt, and then he called the cops. Well, I'm also standing there with an AR-15. So I'm like, I don't want to be standing here when the cops get here. So I go over to the wood line that splits my property and his property. And I just simply take a knee and I'm sitting there with my rifle, looking around, listening. And he's going to put his rifle up, but I know he's got a pistol on him. He's standing in the middle of his front yard with his arms crossed, just like waiting on the cops, just kind of kicking dirt and just waiting. And I'm just watching over him and looking in the woods and, whatever. And as I'm looking at him, his back is towards me. I watch a stick about 18 inches long, about as big around as my thumb, come flying out of the wood line that's like directly in front of him from about 60 feet away. That wood line's at least 60 feet away from where he was standing. And I watched the stick fly end over end and hit him right in the chest. It hits him in the chest. It obviously scares him. He cusses. He runs. He falls as he's going up the stairs, and he goes inside. And when I watched that, that was like kind of like the aha moment. I think there was various aha moments throughout, but watching that, it was just like, it just didn't make any sense for a human to be doing that. For a person, you would have to be super dumb to do that, to go and mess with somebody's house. The owner comes outside with a rifle, fires into the ground. I show up with a rifle, and he's still standing, and you're going to hit him with a stick. It just didn't make sense. Well, shortly after that, things started happening around my property. And it was just little stuff at first. I'd hear weird noises. And eventually, like one of the weirdest things that I remember that first happened, well, there was two really. My dogs, I've got German Shepherds. I raised German Shepherds. And I've got a horse fence that goes around my property. And I'm outside a lot. And my dogs go crazy, and they run down to where my driveway, the garage side of my driveway, and I run down there. And the dogs were barking into the woods, and I'm standing there, and I've got a flashlight, and there's these pallets that I had stacked up right there next to the fence. And I couldn't see over the brush that's right there on the other side of my fence, so I stood up on those pallets to shine my flashlight, and that's when I heard my first wood knock. And it was super loud. Like, it was so loud, it was confusing. I couldn't figure out how a human made that type of noise, is how loud it was, without it being a gun. I mean, it was just whack. And, that was pretty much it. That's all I heard at that moment was that loud wood knock. But I had heard about wood knocks before. And I'm assuming from, watching TV with my kids and stuff, finding Bigfoot and other, from time to time, I'd watch a Bigfoot documentary, anything that was kind of connected, everything on TV kind of connects to UFOs or whatever. So I'm sure I came across some of this information, but that was the first wood knock that I heard. And then shortly after that, there was a night that the dogs went crazy again, went down to the same side of that same fence line. And I run down there, and I can hear bipedal footsteps, very like loud, obvious, slow bipedal footsteps. It's crunch, crunch, crunch. Well, I shine my flashlight over there, and when I do, the walking stops. And I'm sitting there waiting, and I'm shining around. I don't see anything. I don't hear anything, and I turn it off. And the walking starts again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. And it sounds like it's maybe, 25, 30 feet inside of the bushes. But I don't see anything moving at all. And I don't know how long I stood there. But every single time I turned my flashlight on, it would stop walking. I'd turn it off again, and it would start walking. It never picked up pace. It never ran off. It didn't do anything. And it did this thing with me turning the light on and stopping it for, a couple minutes at least before it actually went out of earshot, because I could still hear it making those very slow, deliberate steps, 50, 60 feet off into the woods. And it never did pick up its pace. And that was super strange. And all these things are happening. And I don't honestly don't remember when I actually started like looking into Bigfoot, but it was, shortly after that, watching that stick hit my neighbor that it all kind of clicked. And then I start having these other little things. So it was mainly out of desperation is what it was. I was out of answers, and then I start having all this weird stuff happen. I'm like, well, let's check these Bigfoot things out. I mean, I don't know what else it could be. So I start looking into it, and one of the first things I start learning about is structures. And it just so happened that I had two surgeries. I had a disc replacement surgery. Or first I had a rotator cuff surgery. And I think I had to wait like 60 days. And then I had a disc replacement in my neck when they hadn't got it all out of the way at once. And after I started recovering, I started doing walks in the woods back at the back of my property, going towards the wildlife management area. And I would walk around back there, and I started finding weird stuff. Like I found it's like broken tree stumps. And if you imagine, or, just logs about the same size as maybe a cantaloupe. That's how big around they were. And there was 3 of them, and they were shoved into the ground about 10 feet apart. And I found a couple other kind of weird things, or what I thought was weird. But then again, I didn't know much about it. I'm just guessing. And as I recovered more, I started walking around more in the woods. That's kind of my physical therapy. Well, all the activity and everything that was happening, the lack of answers just kind of pushed me to the point to where I had had enough. So what I decided to do was start doing armed nightly patrols. I would go outside with a gun, with a flashlight, and I would go out in the woods and I would stomp around and shot a fly. It didn't matter if anything happened or not. I would go out there and just be a nuisance. And anytime I came across anything that looked like a limb leaning up against a tree, or, I look back on it now and it's like, no, none of those were structures. But back then I didn't know what I was looking for. But anything I came across that kind of looked like a structure, I would pull it apart, stomp it, break it, whatever. Just made a pest of myself. And I did that for maybe a week and a half. And there was one afternoon where I was building my kid's treehouse on the side of my property. And I got done working for that day, and I went and set up on the front porch. I'm drinking coffee. And this is over an hour. I still got over an hour of sunlight left. I'm sitting there, I'm drinking my coffee, and on the other side of the treehouse, there is a tree, and it's downhill. There's like the treehouse, my fence, and then it goes downhill, and then there's a trail back there where there's a tree probably about as big around as my leg that just starts shaking like crazy, just going back and forth like something's got a hold in the bottom of it. It's just, shaking the mess out of it. But I can't see the bottom 10 feet of the tree. So I jump up and I run over there, and I don't see anything. But I'm like, man, maybe it's one of these Bigfoot things. So I decide, I'm definitely doing my little patrol tonight. So it gets dark. I get all my stuff together. I open my front door, and my dogs run directly over to that side of my fence. So I walk over there and go out of the gate, and I go up there's this trail that it splits my property and my neighbor's property. It goes right down the property line. And at the top, it kind of goes uphill. So I walked up the top of that hill, and then I start going down the trail, and all of a sudden rocks start falling all around me. It's like somebody took a handful of rocks and threw them up in the air, and they all landed kind of in a circle around me, but none of them hit me. And it kind of scared me. But then again, I'm like, oh, well, somebody's here. So now I'm about to get answers, and automatically they just threw rocks at me. So this is the person. So I back up a little bit, and I'm standing there, I'm listening, I'm waiting. I don't hear anything. I don't see anything. So I start going forward again, and the same thing happens. A handful of rocks just falls all around me. Well, I yell out that second handful of rocks, just say it irritated me greatly. So I yelled out, "If you hit me with a rock, I'm going to shoot you." And I stood there. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anything. So I went down that trail, and there's a pine thicket back there on my neighbor's property. And I went back there in that pine thicket, and I had been finding there was an area back there in the pine thicket where the pine straw was really thick, but mushed down. And I was finding like rodent bones and all kinds of stuff back there. I looked back there, didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. After maybe 10 minutes, and I'm out there with a pistol and a flashlight. And I get done looking around, and I make my way up to the top of the hill, and I'm standing there. And actually, I'd already bought a TK Scout, a thermal. I had bought that for hunting, but I already had it. I'm standing there at the top of the hill, and I've got the thermal up to my eye, and I'm looking over at my neighbor's backyard, across their backyard into the other wood line, and I think I see a hot spot. I'm standing there just a couple minutes, and over to my right, from about where I was standing when I had the rocks thrown at me, about 30 feet away, this thing growls at me. And as soon as it growled, that was pretty much it. Like, I knew instantaneously what I was dealing with. That all the running around at night, thinking it was people and being scared, it was maybe people going to break into our cars or whatever, that it was one of these creatures. That's how, it's 30 feet away. And it's scary. And people ask me all the time, "Well, why did you get it on thermal?" And I'll tell you why I didn't get it on thermal, because I was too scared to move. I had that thermal up to my eye, and it growled. And I've got a recording of this same growl, but it's several months later. I've been growled at 3 times since that night, 3 times altogether. The third time it growled at me, I do have an extremely good recording of that, and of it like huffing at my dog and growling and doing all this other stuff, stomping on the ground. One of the best recordings I've got. But I'm standing there with that thermal up to my eyeball, and when it growled, all I could do was slightly move my head just enough to look in that direction, and I was basically waiting on impact. Like, I just thought, I just had so many things going through my mind at the time. I didn't know whether to move. I didn't know whether to get out of the way of danger, or if I did move, is this thing was going to attack me. I just froze up. I've never done that. I've done all kinds of dangerous things. Besides the fire department, the military, I did high-rise rappelling work. I've never had a problem with decision making or being in, any type of dangerous situation. I don't have a problem being out in the woods at night. None of that stuff. But as soon as I heard that growl, I just completely locked up, and my decision making capabilities were just gone for a couple seconds. And I stood there, and I just waited for, I don't know how long it was, a minute or so, and when I realized nothing else was going to happen. And all I said was, "All right, dude, I get it." And I just backed out. I backed up, 5 or 6 steps. And that was the night that, other than actually seeing them later on, but I came as close as you could to believing that these creatures were real just from that growl. And it was, I can imitate it. It's basically just, and, that's all it took. There's nothing like that lives in Georgia. There's no other animal that lives in Georgia that can make that sound. So I knew what I was dealing with. After that growl, I pretty much just became obsessed, just absolutely fascinated that they were real, number one. And number two, a little scared, because, I never even thought about the possibility of these things being real. I'd grown up going out. I'd actually grown up going out in the woods with my grandfather, probably 20 minutes from where I live now. And, the only thing I ever worried about was, a snake every once in a while. That was the worst thing that was going to happen in the woods around here. And I had children and they were little at the time. So not only was I fascinated, I became highly motivated to figure out about as much as I could about these creatures. And I was already kind of thinking like, I want to learn about them. But then again, are they dangerous? I simply didn't know enough. Well, that night I realized I made a conscious decision that, look, I can't be aggressive like this anymore. Number one, I don't know what I'm dealing with. Number two, if I want to learn about them, I can't be aggressive. So the first thing I did the next day is I went out there with a jar of peanut butter, a brand new jar of peanut butter, and a little plastic container of peanut butter inside it that was open, like a little sample. And I walked out there and took it to, I think it was standing behind this big boulder that's out there. So I went and took it out there and put it near that boulder. And then the next night or the next day when I went back out there, the little plastic container with the sample in it was gone. And the only thing that was still there was the top of the peanut butter lid. Now, I don't know if it got it or not. The animal there were no bite marks or anything on that peanut butter lid. And it was brand new. But then again, could have been an animal. But that was kind of my peace offering. Well, from then on, the activity really increased over at my property. But there's two other things that happened. There was that growl, that first growl. And then a few months later, I used to work evening shift. And that's how, that kind of worked to my benefit, me working evening shift for that many years because everybody else would be in bed. Well, I would spend my evenings outside on the front porch, especially after all this started, like waiting for something to happen. But I came home from work one night. I got home maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock. I park in the driveway. I go to get out of my truck. And from about 40 feet, this whole 40 feet thing that comes into play over and over again over the years. They like to get within 40 feet. Why? I don't know, but they do. About 40 feet away from me in this wood line, it growls at me again, just like it did that first night. And it was probably about 2 years before I tell anybody this story, because what I did next, it's not really superhero-ish. I shut the door and I called my wife and I'm like, hey, something just growled at me out here. I don't know what it is. I need you to get my pistol and just don't come outside. Just bring my pistol to the front door. And I got off the phone with her and I opened the door. I ran like a schoolgirl through the gate and up to my house. I went and got a pistol. Then I came out and started looking around again. It would be the next event would be the growl that I ended up recording. And that evening, I had already had activity happening like a couple days before, so I knew they were around. And I don't remember if I heard something behind the house or not. Whatever it wasn't very big because I was just guessing. I get off my front porch, I walk down the sidewalk, and I go to where my driveway is. And I'm standing there looking at that same wood line where I heard the wood knock and heard the bipedal, footsteps. And I'm standing there, and like I said, just a straight up guess. And I say, hello. And right after I say hello, this thing growls at me. And it's behind my house. I'm guessing maybe about 50 feet away. And it's the same exact growl I heard the two other times. It goes, whoa. And my dog's out there with me. And she was already looking around, but not in a like real specific area. But after it growled, she starts barking. And again, I've got this, it's on video. I recorded this whole event and you can hear them just as plain as day, right? So that was the first time that I actually got really good evidence and kind of where I started getting kind of obsessed with getting evidence, to be honest with you. became absolutely fascinated by them. I started reaching out to other people, talking to other researchers, listening to podcasts, anything, I could get my hands on. And eventually I made just a Facebook page, and it was only for me to I wanted to find a research partner or people that were involved in doing this in Georgia. And then I ended up meeting a guy by the name of Mike Taylor. He is a professional adventure athlete. He climbs mountains and does trail runs and all this other crazy stuff. Real nice guy, real cool guy. So him and I started getting together and going out to North Georgia and like looking in areas up there. And as I was doing this, I was kind of documenting the things that were going on around my house on that Facebook page also. And some of the things that would happen were, and to go back a little bit, I kind of had a theory after. I'm kind of jumping ahead, but my theory is this. I think these creatures are running out of habitat. I think whenever they find a specific area that for whatever reason they want to stay in, or they're going to pass through frequently, whenever they find out that the humans know that they exist, or there's a sighting or an interaction or whatever, that you're going to go through a testing phase where these creatures are going to try to gauge what your reaction is. I think they're trying to find out whether we're going to be violent or not. And that's what it all seemed, that's just what it felt like through everything that happened. Because, technically it started out aggressive over at my neighbors. They have since moved. Do not keep in contact with them. I have no idea what they did or what the 14-year-old boy did. I mean, he's a 14-year-old boy. It could have been a number of things he did to make this thing mad. But I'll never know the answer to that question. But I do know it started out kind of aggressive over there, and then I got involved, and then it started paying attention to me. And then I got these aggressive growls, but that was only after I started doing those armed nightly patrols. And I believe that after I quit being aggressive, and what I basically started doing was anytime something would happen, I would act like an appreciative little kid, and I would thank them and congratulate them and clap and do anytime they did anything. I mean, you feel like honestly, and I still do today, feel like an idiot standing there in the dark by yourself, clapping and talking to the woods. But it's kind of the only way. I wanted to make it very, very apparent that I wasn't going to hurt them. And I got to the point to where I wasn't, I used to chase them. Anytime I'd hear something in the woods or whatever, I'd grab a flashlight and go out there and try to chase it down. Well, I quit doing that altogether. So step by step, I started to try to figure out things I could do to inspire these, these interactions, but without being too aggressive. And after doing that for a little while is when I think I started having interactions with juveniles. And I know this by, number one, tracks. I also had a very interesting thermal. I cannot prove the existence of Sasquatch, but I do think it was a juvenile. And then one night, pretty much the same thing. I came home from work and I get out of my truck and I'm going to the gate, and there's an owl off to my right. And it's maybe 60 feet back in the woods. It's not terribly high up. It's kind of, I don't know, I couldn't judge, maybe 10, 15 feet up. It wasn't anything abnormal. It did sound a little off, but I just took it as an owl. But then it happened again. I came home another night, and that owl did the same thing. Right when I would get to the gate, that owl would hoot. But this time it was a lot closer and a little bit lower. And I'm like, yeah, this is kind of weird. The third time this happened, I got out of my truck. I'm walking towards the fence, and I almost get to the gate, and I hear this owl, and it's super close. It's like 15 feet inside the woods, and there's no light out there. And it kind of gives me the chills. It's so close. And it's also kind of off. So I walk inside the gate and I close it and I'm standing there and I mimicked what they did, basically. I mimicked an owl call and it was a terrible mimic. Instantly, right after I did that mimic, there were two responses at the same time. There was one about 5 feet up and there was one that was ground level. And again, maybe, I don't know, 15 feet, 20 feet inside the wood line. And the super interesting, funny thing about this whole thing was they didn't do the call that they did before. They mimicked my terrible mimic. So it completely destroys the idea that this thing's an owl. And there's two of them. It was like two excited kids. So that was kind of, to me, it felt like, this is definitely children. So I honestly think that's kind of how all this came together, is the adults were testing me out. And then when they found out that I wasn't, a threat, then that's when I started getting these interactions with the juveniles. Now I would go on to have all kinds of interactions. Like there's been a couple times where I'd be on my front porch and would see objects come through the air and hit the ground. And well, actually I wouldn't see them in the air, but I'd hear them hit the ground and either roll or slide and stop right in front of my dog. Like it's not an object being thrown at my dog. They're not trying to hit them. And the accuracy to be able to throw something from the woods and then have it just bounce however many times and then slide in right in front of my dog, that was amazing all on its own. But it's, watching stuff like that, it's just mind blowing. This is not supposed to happen. I can't believe it's real. I've actually got that. I think it's happened 3 or 4 times now over the years. And I actually almost got one of them on video. I had been having activity. I go down to my driveway. I'm sitting in my driveway. I'm not even really recording very good. I was using my phone for audio mainly. And I'm sitting there and I hear a stick. I've got these big, huge rocks in my front yard. I hear a stick hit one of these rocks and I look over and I pan over with my phone and you can see my dog like playing, her tail's wagging, and then nudges this stick and then just walks off like she's happy, like she's in the middle of playing with something. A year from the night I was growled at is when I had my first sighting. It was the following October. Again, I had been having activity. I was just sitting up on my front porch. And if you remember what I said before, my neighbor's house is in front of me. And when I say in front of me, it's like directly in front of me. My driveway kind of goes at an angle, right? And whenever they would have their lights on, it's a big white house. You can see their entire house. But I'm sitting there at night, just sitting on the front porch, messing around on my phone or whatever. And my dog's out there on the porch with me. And I'm sitting there, and I don't even know why I looked up, but I looked up, and I see the silhouette of this Sasquatch going straight across my driveway right in front of my neighbor's house. And it is probably, I think it's like 63 yards is where I saw it from where I'm sitting to where it was walking down my driveway. And, of course it's at night and there's lights around me, but there's no lights out there. But it's like looking at, watching a movie and you see the werewolf in front of the moon. It's just a perfect silhouette. And it was his right side. And he was mad. He wasn't as tall as I would have thought he would have been to be as wide as he was. He was maybe about 7 feet tall. But the first thing I noticed was his jaw was just, it jutted out like extreme, like a caveman. And it almost looked like a lion's mane, but I know it's not. It was more like 1980s rock band hair. Like it had a lot of hair from what I could tell from the silhouette from his head down to his shoulders. But I'm watching it walk and I see I'm seeing its right side his full right side silhouette with his jaw sticking out. And I stand up, and when I stand up, it turns its upper body towards me, but its legs are still going in the same direction, like going from my left to my right. But now its upper body is turned towards me, looking directly at me. And that's when I saw how wide this thing was. And when people say these creatures are, 3 to 4 feet wide, that's about how wide this thing was. Now it's at night, it's 60 yards. I can't tell you exactly how wide it was, but it was massively wide. The first couple seconds of just seeing the side profile were obviously already convincing, but when it turned and looked at me, that was I knew exactly what I was looking at. And I guesstimate it lasted 5 to 6 seconds, starting from the left side of the house, walking in front of it till it got to the right side of the house. And that's pretty much what kind of sent me down the road to get me to this point. It's just been one thing after another. But that was my first nighttime sighting. And, eventually I would go on to have daytime Class A sightings. But that very first sighting, it was weird because I was almost more convinced by the growl than I was actually seeing it. It doesn't make much sense to me. Except I felt, I guess, the distance, and it wasn't daytime. And there was always like this part in the back of my head, like, what if I miss sight? Maybe it is just a 7 foot tall, 3.5, 4 foot wide dude that walked down the middle of my driveway at 11 o'clock at night, going into the woods. I know that's not rational, but I tell you that to explain just how convincing that vocalization was. That as soon as that thing vocalized and growled at me like that, it was instantaneous. I knew they were real. But then when I saw that silhouette at night, I'm like, yes, that's a Sasquatch. But I didn't have the same connection. And I didn't, I just wasn't, I'm glad I got growled at first before I saw that, and eventually things would work its way up to starting a group and then going out and actually seeing these things during the daytime. We had all kinds of things over the years, vocalizations. I've got a bunch of really good vocalizations that I've recorded. I got a couple of years ago, I've got a thermal video that, again, it will not prove the existence of Sasquatch, but I am pretty convinced it is one of them. And I actually have, while I'm recording this, I'm also recording objects that are being thrown that are coming like right down in front of the camera. So that was another thing that made it, very convincing. I believe I got a juvenile a couple of years also running across the back hill at the back of my property. But after all these years, it started off like that. And there was one thing I always heard that you don't want to do, and that is to feed these creatures. And I'd heard that time and time again, and I didn't for years. I did the peanut butter thing like a handful of times at the beginning, and then I quit altogether doing that. But then I got to thinking, I'm like, man, that's like, if this is true, then you're telling me that, the reason why we haven't proved these things exist is because we don't know where they're going to be, when they're going to be there, and what they're going to be doing. If we can figure those things out, then we can accomplish possibly long-term observation, right? Well, if you're telling me that if I gift these creatures food that it could, and then I stop, then I'm going to get some type of violent reaction. Well, that's my way of getting these things on video, because I know where they're going to be, when they're going to be there, and what they're going to be doing. So I started gifting, and there was a second part to it too. We bought chickens, and for about a month, the eggs started disappearing, and I didn't know if the chickens just weren't laying or if these things were taking the eggs. So I'm like, all right, well, I'll just start leaving eggs I just started a gifting area, and I left corn, eggs, apples. I started leaving all types of things out there, right? So after all these years, and I had been left a few things before, like having pieces of concrete that I know are supposed to be like back in the woods, end up on like the side of my truck bed, stuff like that. But after doing this, leaving the corn and the eggs and everything out there, I started going back to what I consider their hill, also looking for other places to leave stuff. And I found a spot back across the creek where I started leaving eggs and stuff back there too. And I went back there one time, and there's a stump that's right next to the trail where I go back and leave eggs. And there was what looks to be a Native American skinning rock made out of quartz just sitting on top of that stump. And I'm like, man, if you were leaving something out there for somebody to see, it's like the perfect spot, and there's just no way you can miss it. This, piece of quartz sitting on top of this rock. Man, is this really them? And then I don't remember exactly how long after that, but I went back there again, leaving eggs, and I got back there, and it was during the winter time, and I found it was half of a squirrel. It's like something just bit it right in half, and it was clean too. There were no, nothing nasty, guts, entrails, or anything. It was just like almost like you just cut it straight in half. I didn't think much about it. I'm like, well, maybe I interrupted a predator or whatever, or they just got the bottom half and that was it. But I didn't touch it. The next day on my way home from work, my wife calls me. She said, "Hey, there is a squirrel behind the chicken coop, a dead squirrel." I'm like, "What?" So I get home and I go back to the chicken coop, and 6-8 feet behind the chicken coop, there's a freshly dead squirrel. Looks like it just fell asleep, laying right behind the chicken coop. Now, there's no way to know if they left that or not, but it's kind of like, it's just so on the nose. I'm leaving eggs back there, and then it leaves a squirrel, and then I don't touch it. And then now I've got this fresh squirrel right behind the chicken coop. It just kind of felt like they were gifting me stuff. But this is going on for years, pretty much. And you and I discussed doing a part 2 of this, but I guess what I can say is about 2021, I'd been doing this a while, and I was contacted by a guy by the name of Captain Joe Cayley. And Captain Joe was a former Army Ranger. He actually lost his leg rescuing civilians in Iraq, got a medal from Obama. Anyway, he had a sighting on a military base years ago. And it was in the middle of this shooting competition that he was actually running, And he knew I was prior military, so he contacted me, told me his story, we became friends. And eventually one day he just asked me, said, "Hey man, do you want to start a podcast?" And I said, "No, I don't want to have anything to do with podcasting. I'm not trying to do this, for a whole bunch of people or whatever. But I would like to start a research group." And we got to talking, and I got to thinking about it. I'm like, man, and the reason why Joe didn't tell anybody for years about the things that happened to him. And he tried contacting people like the BFRO and a couple other people, and nobody took him seriously, and nobody really understood the having the sighting that he had on this military rifle range. How much of a controlled environment it is, and to have that happen, just how important it was and how drastic of a event this was to have happen when he's running this thing. And the thought of this dude getting a medal from Obama for saving the lives of civilians, but kind of being ashamed to talk to people about this kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And got back together with him and said, "Hey man, let's do a podcast." So that was when the Sasquatch Encounter Brigade was born. And we started doing field research, and him and I started doing a podcast together. Him and I don't do that particular podcast together anymore. He actually runs the Veterans Golf Association. He got super busy. So I kind of went off on my own. I do have a podcast that I do with a guy named Richard Farabee, and it is called Sasquatch Unredacted. So the research group is the Sasquatch Encounter Brigade, and the podcast we do together, or that I do with Richard, is Sasquatch Unredacted.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves and the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah, the sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. His pickup man had been through it, getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, booking eight bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I'd do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Somebody call it backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the drumming, low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Pace of the city life drives me wild. The only tune is the cars rushing by, with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Somebody call it backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the drumming, low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Somebody call it backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the drumming, low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems drumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm, ride chicken porch swing, mama's best sweet tea kind of sound.